Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game faction focus for PanOceania. That's right, the hyperpower, the boys in blue, the arguable poster children of the setting, and the faction ranked best in the game in the deeply authoritative and absolutely very serious Infinity All Factions Post Mazebreaker tier list recently published on this channel. And while I will take this moment to remind everyone in the audience that the purpose of tier lists is first for entertainment and second to be disagreed with on the internet, if I'm going to rank a faction that highly, I may as well also take that as an opportunity to talk about them and explain why. And so that's what we'll be doing in this video. We'll be talking about who PanOceania are, how they play, what are their strengths, limitations, and faction identity, before jumping into Infinity Army to go through many of the profiles that make this such a strong, interesting, and versatile faction. And make no mistake, it's in the profiles in Army that we will really start to unpick the strength of PanOceania as a faction. Because to talk about their strengths, it really is just in their profiles. Now, okay, but isn't every army kind of just a combination of the strengths of its profiles? Yes, but in PanOceania it is particularly evident. Because in PanOceania there are not just many of the best things in the game, but multiples of best-in-class profiles in different types of unit, including many profiles that are just transformative of the list around them. In PanOceania we find multiple of the best gunfighters in the entire game, including really premium tags and heavy infantry. We find multiple of the best ARO pieces in the game. We find multiple of the best lieutenants in the game. We find one of the best flyers in the game, and that sounds like faint praise, but flyers right now are such a powerful unit class that is worth mentioning, and the presence of the Red Eye in PanOceania is transformative. And so even if it is the third or fourth or fifth best flyer in the game, the effect it has on PanOceanian lists makes it really significant. PanOceania has some of the best fire teams of any vanilla faction, and all of this is underpinned by multiple of the best in the game cheap utility pieces. And this includes things like some of the best in the game network projection for good quality defensive hacking, and among the best visibility control in the game for cost. And those two things are things that were completely absent from PanOceanian's lineup in N3 and N4, but which has emerged in N5. And so all of this collectively gives PanOceania access to really extremely powerful and useful profiles that can be put together into multiple list configurations. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't certain scenarios and certain situations in a game that can stretch PanOceania out of its comfort zone, and indeed, playing against PanOceania is often an exercise in identifying the extremely premium pieces that the PanOceanian player has put into their list and is using, and to play around them rather than trying to engage them directly. But all of these strengths collectively mean that the combination of gunfighting and ARO and utility leaves PanOceania just about always in, at minimum, a strong position to engage with the things that the game fundamentally wants us to do. It's just a bunch of really, really good stuff that can be put together in really interesting ways. Now, there are limitations to PanOceania. Even in N5, where many of the old limitations of the faction have receded or been removed entirely, there are still places where the roster is not as strong. There are a lot of very specialized models in PanOceania, or perhaps to put it more accurately, a lot of very good single role units. This isn't a faction that has a ton of multi-role elements or multi-role fire teams. And so there has to be a lot of judiciousness with how PanOceania plays. You'll want to use your big strong gunfighting piece and your big strong ARO piece to establish an attritional lead, but you're not going to have access to pieces, mostly, that can both fight their way forward and inflict casualties, and having reached the midfield and had a scrap, also accomplish mission objectives. In something like JSA Shinden Butai, for example, we have the Hatamoto Imperial Guard, which, if it is adequately supported and there's visibility control, or even sometimes if it's not and it just uses its Spitfire to gap close, has almost nothing in the game it truly fears, and likes getting into the midfield, and is very maneuverable thanks to the nanoscreen and movement skills, and incidentally is a specialist, there are very few things in PanOceania that you will take regularly that fill that kind of category, the just put the game on their back itself kind of unit. There is the Crux Knight, which is worth noting. We would more often see the Crux Knight in Kestrel Colonial Force, where it links very nicely, but the Crux Knight is technically a piece that does something like that, but it's not on the same level, particularly when you compare its cost with capability as something like a Hatamoto. And so this means that as a Pan-Oceanian player, we have to put our units in positions where they flex their strengths, because there are a lot of units in this faction that have one and a bit clearly defined strengths and don't really want to operate outside of that. And in addition, there are some limitations in the roster where it isn't that PanOceania lacks these capabilities, but just that they are limited. There is a limited selection of skirmishers and jump troops, and while the Banshee absolutely goes fucking hard, there aren't any heavy jump troops, which is a category that's kind of emerged over the course of N5, but especially recently with Mazebreaker and the emergence of the Bearcat, those pieces that can land and really make a hole. Something like the Santiago Knight from Military Orders, for example, isn't present here in PanOceania. And while there is a fairly reasonable selection of skirmisher and skirmisher adjacent troops, none of them are really premium. They're all just pretty okay and pretty interesting and just expensive enough that some compromise is required to fit them. I personally really like Zulu Cobras, but even the Zulu Cobra is only forward deployment +4, and so as a true skirmisher has some limitations there. It's also a faction with pretty limited close assault. We've got some elements. We've got Teutons and Joan and an Orc, and you will notice that all of those pieces are hackable. But if we want to turn the corner with a plus burst shotgun and take some names with a model that can also resist a chain rifle, it's basically just an Orc. And actually, I would consider fielding that in some list. Orcs can be included in linked teams relatively flexibly. But if you're running a linked orc, you have to try and fit the rest of the fire team together, and getting that fire team to also have fire team bonuses means you're probably looking at something like, for example, bolts, who are maybe straying out of their ideal comfort zone if they're being forced to adopt a close assault role, even if that close assault role is escort the orc up the field. You can struggle in PanOceania, or you can find yourself having built lists in PanOceania where once the ramparts have been cleared, okay, how do we kill the rest of the enemy? Especially if that enemy is hunkered down behind a good hacking network. Now, you can paper over this a bunch of different ways, including, and we will get to this, the red eye, but it is a restriction. And equally, since we're talking about the red eye as one of the ways to manage that kind of like, okay, my opponent's head is down, what do I do about that? That's yet another hackable element. PanOceania are a very hackable faction. There are some pieces we can take, again, to mitigate that as a limitation. The motorized bounty hunter is going to feature in the list that we show at the end of this video. But if your opponent has an Asura, for example, we just aren't clearing her. And so instead we have to just respect her hacking area and kill any repeaters that she drops, which, yep, that's what something like the motorized bounty hunter has to do, which can be a bit of an order sink and can represent a line of counterplay against all of the things we're trying to do. And then finally, this is still, despite everything in N5, PanOceania, and PanOceanian specialists are still a thing. In a lot of lists, it's just going to be the Tactical Awareness Pathfinder is your boy. Now, there are a few other genuinely mobile specialists in the faction. We aren't totally absent them. The Banshee is, for example, one of them. But if you're building a PanOceanian list, you can often do far worse than, as one of the first models in the list, add in the Tactical Awareness Pathfinder and only cut it later after you are comfortable that you have enough specialist added. Particularly when the Sasha drops out with the rotation of the next ITS season, we will in PanOceania really need to kind of think about how we meet our specialist requirements, particularly as it seems that ITS is moving back toward, the pendulum is swinging again, back towards fairly order intensive and complicated and not easy to achieve scenarios, which is an environment where PanOceania doesn't always thrive. Alright, so very notable strengths, also limitations. What does that create as an identity for PanOceania as a faction? And my contention is that, kind of appropriately, PanOceania lists they are a faction of hyperpowers. There are many hyperpower profiles, units that are centerpieces and which are extremely powerful in their role, but where a lot goes into enabling them. A lot of Pan-Oceanian lists, if you want to lean into the most interesting, powerful, and fun things in the faction, will be about making sure you have all of the infrastructure to support 2 or 3 or 4 really premium elements. And once you have taken those really premium elements, you have to apply them judiciously. And there is a particular play pattern that I think emerges if we're talking about identity, that emerges that you should probably pursue kind of by default in a lot of Pan-Oceanian lists. How Pan-Oceania used to play is that you would use your big guns to clear any enemy AROs, or just force your enemy or incentivize your enemy to sit down and null deploy, and then use that space to accomplish the mission. I think modern Pan-Oceania in N5 wants to play differently. I think what it wants to do is exert pressure in list construction to force your opponent to put models on ARO so that you can then use your big guns to kill those ARO pieces and establish advantage. Importantly, not just space to do the mission, but attritional advantage from an early stage of the game. I don't think it's enough in N5 just to have your opponent's head down and go and do the mission. I think you need to force your opponent's head up so that you can blow it the fuck off and play the rest of the game with an advantage that way. And you almost want to do the same thing with your ARO pieces. Pan-Oceania has ARO pieces in it that don't just disincentivize movement or control space, but which can genuinely kill, and those should be combined with pressure on the opponent to take AROs, gunfighting ability to kill those AROs, to establish an attritional advantage that then creates not just the space for you to do the mission, but denies your opponents the order and resources to do the mission themselves. That's the path to victory for Pan-Oceania in N5, and that's where we get around to pieces like the Red Eye, for example. Pieces that force your opponent into establishing a defense so that you can pick that defense apart. And if we want to look into the future a little bit, and maybe imagine a world where flyers take a little bit of a tap and get nerfed a little bit, I can imagine that. I would advocate for it. Pan-Oceania is probably still a faction that continues to take the red eye in order to continue to force your opponent to take an active defense, or if the red eye gets really nerfed, which I consider unlikely, but if flyers really cop it, again, I consider that unlikely, to look into as many other ways as possible to really incentivize your opponent to keep posting ARO pieces so that you can keep blowing them up. And so that's our faction identity in Pan-Oceania. A faction full of hyper power pieces that you use to exert pressure on the opponent to take AROs, destroy those AROs, destroy your opponent when taking your own AROs, and use all of that collective attritional and space advantage to go ahead and win the game with our modest but serviceable specialists. It's a very solid playstyle, and you can flex around that 100%. But it's that style and the multiple ways to configure a list to enable that style that are why Jordan and myself, when we did the recent tier list, felt pretty comfortable putting Pan-Oceania not just in S tier, but kind of at the top of S tier, really only competed with by Aleph and Operations subsection. And with that, let's jump into Infinity Army and actually take a look at all of these profiles that I have been alluding to / raving about. Now, 2 things to note before we begin. I think I have figured out a good way in the workflow to get pictures of the regiments we're talking about appear in the bottom right corner of the screen. The res won't be incredible, as I am relying on the model identifier sheets that have been published on the Human Sphere wiki. I don't know the person who originally put those together, but if you Google Infinity model identifiers, you will find them. They are a godsend. And so please do let me know in the comments if that's something that you like. It's been requested a few times in the past. Secondly, just in terms of how we're going to approach this, we're going to kind of move through this in about the way that I would at least consider writing a list. And so we're starting with all of the stuff that you want to bulk out a list and support the cool stuff. The vegetables you have to eat before you get to your dessert. Yes, I know I use culinary metaphors a lot. Once we've gotten through the core supporting elements that enable all of the cool shit, we're going to talk about transformative lieutenants, the thing that you throw into a list once you've got your support baked down, that really makes the list what it is and sets the direction, and then the other stuff, cool big guns that can kill in active, cool big guns that can kill in ARO, the units that exert that pressure or punish on null deployment, and then specialists and other pieces. And all of that has us starting with Fennec Fusiliers. What about regular Fusiliers? Yeah, we ain't taking those in this faction. They might exist, they might even be AVA total, but Fennecs are where we're starting. Now, you can't link Fennecs, or indeed regular Fusiliers for that matter, but Fennecs are still excellent as utility pieces. And there are a couple of profiles here that we would take on the regular, but the important one to draw your attention to is the Fennec Forward Observer. Firstly, it's a specialist. It's not a fantastic specialist, it's only willpower 12, but it is still a specialist. Secondary, and probably more important, is two really high utility functions. The first is that it's a model with sensor. That's just very, very useful to have. This is a faction where, for example, Next Wave exists, and having just something that can puzzle out puzzlers that is not going to get completely murked when an Emerat appears is very useful, and a 13-point specialist, that will do that. And then finally, and most importantly, this is the cheapest, or technically the second cheapest, but US Ariadne does not count. This is the cheapest that exists in a good faction, Disco Ball in the game, and it's on a Ballistic Skill 12 platform. Now, PanOceania does not always need this profile. PanOceania can absolutely expect, much of the time, to rely on gunfighting dominance that makes visibility control less essential. But look, God, just take this thing. It's 13 points for Disco and a Sensor and Forward Observer. 9 or 10 points for a regular order is just good on rate. Paying 4 more points for this capability, even paying for it twice if you want to, just opens up certain options. The most important of those options is insurance in the late game if everything else goes to shit, and you just gotta press a button underneath the guns of your opponent. It can happen. We used to talk about Panoceanian lockout, which was something that would occur when the worst happened and you just lost a whole bunch of gunfights, which can occur in Infinity. Well, Fennec Fusiliers with the Forward Observer, Sensor, and Disco Ball is insurance against that. There are a couple of other profiles that we might consider as well, the main one being the Hacker. It's a hacker with a fast panda. It's 16 points. That's very good. It's also randomly BTS 3, which will save it occasionally, but mostly we're thinking about this as a cheap hacker with a fast panda. We won't take this profile as often these days because there has been a recently added profile that renders it really pretty fucking obsolete. But sometimes it will be a good model and the right fit for a list. We can also consider the triangulated fire mine layer. This is a cheap, okay, I'm not going to call it a secondary gun, tertiary maybe at best, but if you're using triangulated fire, you don't get special dice from linked teams, etc. anyway, so the fact that it isn't linked isn't a huge deal, and 3 dice on 12s with no mods sometimes is what the doctor ordered. You're mostly paying 14 points for a regular order and a deployment zone mine, but in some cases and in some metagames that could be useful, but really the Fennec is mostly about the Disco Ball profile. Now, if Fennecs are our first cheap orders with upside unit, then Pilot X is our second. Pilot X himself is not enormously cheap. 21 points is a bit expensive to say this model is a cheap order, but he brings a tremendous amount of utility, including unlocking the 8-point racer bots. Now, I do think it is reasonable if you're a Panoceanian player to not necessarily include this guy in every single list. But if you aren't taking him, you do probably need to justify why, because the upside that he brings is really significant. There is just a huge amount of value to turning on your repeaters, and Panoceania can have a lot of models that are incidentally repeaters in incidentally useful places. Even if you're just taking Fugazi drone bots, which you may as well, they're a 7-point regular order and AVA2 in this faction, turning those into an actual repeater area that your opponent has to respect is very valuable to do things like defend against enemy flyers in this game. And Pilot X is one of the best defensive hackers in the entire game. What do we want from a defensive hacker? We want a model that is just going to take AROs through a repeater network but whom is not vulnerable to being sniped out by enemy KHDs. Pilot X, we are very comfortable having as far back in our deployment zone as possible, and he's one of the most resilient models in the game at holding off enemy killer hacker attacks. Not only is he natively BTS 6, but he has zero pain. And having zero pain as an ARO against enemy KHDs makes it just enormously risky for any opponent to go after Pilot X because it could just result in sinking all of your orders and not getting a kill. There are hackers that can brute force through him, but even then we would expect that to take quite a bit of time, and probably also requires extending pieces forward to get network projection into the teeth of your ARO guns, which can work out just fine. That defensive hacking utility is very, very high value, and incidentally, he's a REM driver as well. A very good REM driver to boot. Ballistic Skill 13, Fizz 13, and BTS 6 mean that you can put this on any remote in the entire faction and expect to get some benefit. And while there are some factions that benefit more from his REM driving than generic PanOceania, if you wanted to take a total reaction bot, perfect. There you go, it's Ballistic Skill 13. If you're not taking a total reaction bot, there's a pretty good chance that there's going to be at least some other remote in your list that gets some benefit out of that, even if it's just a Peacemaker getting a Fizz bonus, a BTS bonus, and +1 point of ballistic skill. It's free real estate, you may as well use it. The other thing Pilot X does is he unlocks those racer bots. Now, we also have access to the generic racer bot profiles, but Pilot X's Racerbots Mark III are the best in class. They are very annoying to kill, they dodge quite well, and they have light riot stoppers, making them very good corner guards that threaten a mobility kill on anything that hits your deployment zone, but they also have significant other upside. The para mine dispensers are just para mines cannot be ignored. There is no model that just goes, yeah, I don't care about that, I'll just spang that. Anything is threatened by para weapons, or just about anything anyway. It breaks through immunity because it doesn't target armor or BTS. And even a model that's very good at dodging might not want to risk that. And so just having the ability to throw out a few of these mines over the course of the game, even if you don't have baggage, that's very high upside. The other thing they do is they are just incidentally one of the best repeater projection models in the game now. One of the changes that was recently made to PanOceania is that the blockers, which were previously amongst the best in class in terms of defensive hacking and network projection, because a blocker was very good at firing off its pitches, blocker profiles got separated. You want the hacker, you can't have the pitcher. You want the pitcher, you can't have the hacker. We might still take the blocker. For completeness, that's the blocker on screen now, but we don't really need to because the blocker has been rendered somewhat obsolete by Pilot X's racer bots being able to move 8 inches and place a deployable repeater without needing to roll and without any chance of failure. And so you've got in one model fantastic network projection, fantastic utility from the paramine dispenser, and a fantastic close-in defense on a model that generates a regular order for 8 points and is incidentally quite annoying to kill, having a bang bomb and good fizz and the 360 visor and just a bunch of other little rules. Even if it has no cover, it can still be quite difficult to put down. And if you did put it down, it was an 8-point model. Now, there are a few other models that are cheap orders with upside that are worth mentioning. One of them is the Fugazi Dronbot. Since we're often taking Pilot X in any case, we've got defensive hacking. Fugazi are cheap orders which we may as well take. The Sierra Dronbot, as noted, 18 points is really quite affordable, and we have Pilot X. I would only take a Sierra in situations where I also have an engineer, because even at Ballistic Skill 13, it will still go down in ARO very easily, so only take it if you think you can recover it. But if you do, 18 points is still below the average cost for a model, and gets you some good ARO. It's a very good beneficiary of Pilot X. And then finally, as noted, we have our state-financed Pathfinder. The Pathfinder Dronbot with Tactical Awareness is probably the highest utility and easiest to use specialist in the faction. It's 6/4 move, it has Tactical Awareness, so it gets itself up the field. When it gets there, it's Willpower 13 and has a bunch of other utility. It's a sensor, it's a deactivator, and it's a repeater, and all of those things are good. A lot of my lists in generic PanOceania start with a Pathfinder Dronbot and then only cut it once I'm comfortable being able to do so. Do I have my specialist covered otherwise? All right, cool. We can put the Pathfinder at home for now. We've got this covered in other ways. By default, it's a very good piece to include in a list. Now, straddling the line between cheap orders and utility and our next category, transformative lieutenants, are the BCA magistrates. These guys are one of the regiments that I was referring to when I was talking about how PanOceania has multiple best-in-class lieutenants. And there's a class of lieutenants that has emerged in N5, which is really just purpose-built lieutenant profiles. The very first one of these was something like the Alpha unit in O12, where it really isn't designed to fight, it's designed to have skills like Strategos and Counterintelligence and extra command tokens, etc. And the BCA Magistrate is the best one of those in the entire game. It's the best one because it has the two most important skills, Strategos and Counterintelligence. And having paid for only those two skills, it is the cheapest. 19 points for a Counterintelligence Strategos Lieutenant is an absolute steal. There is no faction that the BCA Magistrate would not be a transformative addition to, and given that low cost, high quality lieutenants were something that we would never previously have associated with PanOceania, this guy's a really big fucking deal. He is kind of your default lieutenant, but default only in the sense that if you don't want to take a cool, powerful bruiser lieutenant, you take the BCA Magistrate. You hide him in the back, you hope he doesn't die, and he pays for himself just by existing. Now, even if you aren't taking a Magistrate Lieutenant, you're still kind of likely to take a Magistrate some of the time, because a Magistrate is a source, also relatively cheaply, 21 points for Chain of Command. Now, there are a couple of profiles that we can use to access Chain of Command in PanOceania, and accessing Chain of Command in PanOceania is very useful because many of the hyperpower pieces we're going to talk about are, among other things, often viable and indeed optimal lieutenant profiles. And while some of us are often bold enough to just raw dog a cool, powerful, hackable lieutenant with no backup, it's probably sensible from time to time to include Chain of Command in your lists, and you may as well take Chain of Command that also has counterintelligence. Why not? It's more advantage. And so for that reason, even if they aren't your LT, BCA Magistrates will often be in lists because Chain of Command is useful. Again, not the only Chain of Command in faction, we will sometimes take another one, but consider taking Magistrates if you think you need the cock in your list. Now, from here on the list of transformative lieutenants, we spike in cost real fast, but we get to Joan of Arc, and she is in a category all of her own. One of the OG inspiring leadership lieutenants. There are perhaps some inspiring leadership lieutenants that surpass her, at least in terms of cost effectiveness these days. Saladin does come to mind, so does William Wallace. But none of those pieces are also fighters. What you get with Joan of Arc is certainly she is more expensive than a model like Saladin, but she's not that much more expensive, and she is a whole-ass combat powerhouse, which absolutely requires you to play the risk-reward game, because if she goes down or gets isolated, Chain of Command will only do so much because she's an inspiring leadership lieutenant and you've probably taken a bunch of irregulars. But provided you can manage that, she just goes hard. Let's talk about the advantages she has. First, as a lieutenant, yep, she has inspiring leadership and she has tactical awareness, and she can be at the head of a fire team. She can join, in particular, there's a very interesting fire team that you can build. She can join Haris fire teams. Now, I have her mobility armor form regiment on screen now, but this all applies to both her regular, more heavily armored multi-rifle version or her mobility armor with AP Spitfire. I like the mobility armor profile, firstly because 6-2 move is very nice, and secondly because an AP Spitfire just makes great use of her ballistic skill 15. But do bear in mind that everything I'm saying kind of applies to both profiles, and both are very good. She can join a Harry's fire team, which means that if you want her hanging around with a pair of orcs or a pair of bolts, hell, a pair of blades if you wanted 3 tactical awareness orders in one fire team, and perhaps the most interesting is a pair of helots. Now, helots you might traditionally think, yeah, we've got Patsy Garnett in this faction. Patsy Garnett is Fire Team Master. She makes helots into regular models. Do you know who else makes helots into regular models? An inspiring leadership lieutenant. And so Joan can just duo along with a pair of helots who she makes regular, and that fire team has duo bonuses. It has 2 helots in it, which means the Neurokinetics helots have +1 special die, and Joan, who is a ballistic skill 15 AP Spitfire, has +1 special die. That's a really, really good fire team. Joan is also one of the true close assault pieces in this faction. There is only one model in the entire army that has Martial Arts 3, and it's Joan. And while CC23 Martial Arts 3 with a very good quality explosive close combat weapon is not as good at close combat as some factions can do, it's still plenty good. She can absolutely stab some fools, and again, this is a faction that's got access to 14, 13-point disco ball profiles, so she is very strong. It is a testament to how good other lieutenants can be in this faction that she isn't the default, she has plenty of competition. But if you do take her, she's a model that is fast, brings lots of orders between tactical awareness and inspiring leadership, is a fantastic gunfighter, and is very durable. Arm 3 is not massive, but Arm 3 BTS 6 with Vitality 2 and no wound incapacitation is closing in on at least tag quantity of wounds, if not quality, with the Armor 3, which just makes her a fantastic choice to lead an army. Now, from Joan, we get even further up the expensive but powerful into Tikbalang's Armored Chasseurs Regiment, and this guy is one of the best tags in the entire game. If you're taking him, I do genuinely prefer to take him as a lieutenant, because he's a lieutenant plus 1 order, and he's a fantastic. Like, you don't take an NCO with a Tikbalang. You could, but you don't really take an NCO with a Tikbalang. You just spend all the Tikbalang's orders on the Tikbalang, because it has tactical awareness and 2 lieutenant orders, which means that before you get to any regular orders in the group, it is climbing all over the place, taking gunfights by itself with 3 orders that it gets to spend. And it's a fantastic gunfighter. It is just a heavy machine gun, that's true, but it's ballistic skill 15, mimetism, and climbing plus. You can take a 9-point Tech B as yet another regular order with upside to boost its capabilities. Otherwise, it's just a very, very good tag. It's frankly not even particularly bad at engaging other tags. Certainly, it's very capable of engaging other light tags, because it just gets so many bullets through thanks to BS15 and mimetism that the fact that it doesn't have armor piercing is by no means the end of the world. Volume of hits will put down a lot of enemy pieces, even ones that are ostensibly quite heavily armored. Now, things to note, Climbing Plus lets you really be a predator piece with this and play it almost like a vehicle, getting angles your opponent did not expect. And if you have no other outlet for these orders, like you almost always should, it's very fast. Even if you budget orders to pull it back to safety, you'll often be able to punch quite deep in on your opponent and get kills with enfilade fire. Even if you think you can't do that, it's got shock mines and it can dispense a Crabot, which means it will almost always have an outlet for those orders, even if those orders are just getting a Crabot out to do some objectives and placing some shock mines. Very, very good piece that I would not actually say I had historically seen a ton of, but who I think Racer X opens up because he's put even more of a good quality floor underneath the really premium pieces that we see in PanOceania. Now, there are a few more really premium lieutenants that I think are worth mentioning, but they all kind of follow on from that same vibe that the Tikbalang sets. The first is the Cutter, 95 points, you lose NCO, but you gain the lieutenant skill. Now, obviously, making use of that hidden deployment as the Cutter Lieutenant involves a certain amount of risk that perhaps you would not necessarily want to take on yourself, but even if you just deploy this guy as a big Chonkin camo marker, it's just the best gun in the game, just about. Ballistic skill 15, mimetism 6, surprise attack on a tag chassis, a main battle tag, armor 8, 3 structure chassis is just best in class. It's top of the pack. The only negative things to say about it is that it obviously has no closer-in defense, and it doesn't have as many orders as something like the Tikbalang, and frankly, in many cases, it's just going to be overkill. You just don't need the Cutter to kill most of the things in the game. Sometimes you do, and so having access to it can be a very big deal, and certainly it is more affordable than it has ever been, and if you want true high watermark, no pun intended, gunfighting, then the Cutter is where it's at. You can just take this guy. You can afford him in a 15 trooper list now, and he will just go ahead and fuck. Second to last in our list of big, powerful lieutenants is Maximus. And Maximus is where we start to get a little bit more specialized, because what Maximus is bringing to the mix over something like the Tikbalang, for example, is much, much worse gunfighting. Not bad gunfighting, he is still ballistic skill 14, but what Maximus brings is just really, really hard to kill, durable, brawler, powerful kind of lieutenant piece. The Cutter enables some of that. The Cutter is more expensive than Max. The Cutter enables that through being in a marker state. Max enables it by just being a chonker. The one limitation of him is that he's not terribly difficult to hack. Yes, he is immune to being possessed, but he's not immune, for example, to the isolation from the Oblivion program. But with that sole exception, it's just very difficult to perish this guy. He's armor 6 BTS 6, but with immunity armor. He's very good in close combat. Not as good, for example, as Joan, but CC 24 with Natural Born Warrior and CC Attack -6 is plenty good, and it's good in a way that other close combatants really don't necessarily want to run into CC with him. There are pieces in the game that can risk a fight with Maximus. The Hadamoto Imperial Guard, for example, will engage relatively fearlessly, but anything short of that doesn't really want to get into a scrap with him, whereas he's probably quite comfortable having a close combat engagement with them. And then finally, this is a 4-structure model. Now, he transmutes. On the 3rd wound he suffers, Operator Maximus bails out, but Operator Maximus is no slouch himself, and it's a 4th wound to have to get through on this guy. He's arguably less durable perhaps than some of the most durable models in the game, but even something like the Iguana, which is kind of a 5-wound piece, Max's immunity arm and relatively compact silhouette 6 make him more durable in some respects. And so especially if there are scenarios where you are looking to have a lieutenant that is public and open information and whom perhaps you don't want to be under a marker state or don't trust living under a marker state, but who you do absolutely want to survive, Maximus can fill that role. And these days, it used to be that that was kind of his niche, where it could be difficult to have him like really brawl and hang and make good use of that durability, but he's got AP rounds on all of his guns now, which means that if he's willing to just force the orders through it, there are things he doesn't want to fight. I wouldn't want Maximus to go up against a Swiss Guard, for example, and you better believe we'll get to the Swiss Guard in short enough order, because even with immunity armor, he might struggle to actually put damage on that thing and its firing templates back. But Maximus is both tough as guts and able to dish the damage out, even if just by dint of firing order after order through that AP HMG, because it's a ballistic skill 14 AP HMG. Very good lieutenant, but 82 points is expensive. Even with the things in PanOceania that can subsidize those costs, they only go so far. And unlike all of the other tags, Maximus isn't a specialist and can't dispense one until he takes those wounds and Operator Maximus bails out. So consider that as a limitation as well, but still a very good piece. And if you like Maximus, if you like that ability to brawl and fight at most ranges and get in a scrap up close and punch down with that shield, there's a lot about him that is fun and strong, even if he would be personally 3rd or 4th or 5th on my list of lieutenants I would reach for in the faction myself. And finally, as a bit of a wild card potentially in this section, I did just want to mention the Hetkari shooter. Now, I don't know if this guy will always be your lieutenant, because if you're reaching for a Hetkari, there's a pretty good chance you're also taking a magistrate, and the magistrate could just be the lieutenant at that point. But if you're running, for example, Bolt Chain of Command, a Bolt duo usually, you want to have that Bolt, you want to play the marksmanship game, and you have access to Chain of Command in other ways, the Hakari is still just one of the best-in-class gunfighters in the entire game, and importantly, he's not as expensive as all of these tags that we've been talking about. He is more expensive than Joan, but he's also absolutely a better gunfighter than Joan. She's quite good, don't get me wrong, but Ballistic Skill Attack -3 and Marksmanship put this guy in a whole nother league, and unlike Mobility Form Joan, she does have no wounding cap, but he's properly Armor 5. And so I think this is a guy that is just worth considering occasionally as a niche pick in some Pan-Oceanian lists. I think you can very easily build a list that runs a Bolt Marksmanship Sniper, a Bolt Chain of Command, and then the Hetkari, and that is some gunfighting absolutely sorted at multiple different range bands and with serious ability to punch down into a whole variety of different ARO pieces. I do think he is more niche and less transformative than some of the other lieutenant profiles that we've covered, but if you want a discount model that gunfights harder than many tags, the Hetkari will do it. And since we've mentioned bolts a couple of times now, we may as well use that as a segue to sort of carry on through things that we might consider adding into a list, which is other big guns that kill in active turn. And frankly, we've mentioned a lot of the ones that will exist in the faction. But as a kind of bridging unit, let's also mention Neoterran bolts. Because a bolt duo or 2 bolts in a Haris team is just a very, very good quality, medium infantry, but very good quality workhorse fire team. Bolts have got Marksmanship, which is very good, and Warhorse, which is very good, and perfectly serviceable stats on perfectly affordable prices. They're just one of the best medium infantry regiments in the game, even before Nomads start getting actually good and interesting medium infantry with the Maze Breaker upgrade. These guys are almost a kind of parallel to Fennec Fusiliers in the sense of they are there are many different interesting profiles that collectively combine and can be put together in different ways, which I really value, and Bolts have been doing this for the entire edition. Now, the multi-sniper rifle is the one that you will often reach for as the head of a duo. You can also have a Spitfire, and there is nothing at all wrong with 5 dice or 4 dice plus 1 hitting on 16. Spitfire is very serviceable, but the multi-sniper is what you should usually reach for as the gun. It has an MSV1, and it has Warhorse, and it has Marksmanship, which means it almost doesn't suffer negative mods. It will hit on 16s almost all of the time, the sole exception being Albedo Troopers or very high Mimetism. And that almost complete immunity to negative mods, including negative mods from partial cover, make it just a very reliable gunfighter, combined with the multi-sniper range bands, very good in radial scenarios, but kind of just good already, and the fact that a visor ARO piece is just really useful against certain factions makes it a fantastic inclusion in any PanOceanian lists. It won't fit in every single PanOceanian list, sometimes there are other luxury pieces that you want to take, but as a bridging unit that is more firepower and more ARO and more options, a Bolt Sniper as part of a Bolt duo or a Haris team that includes 2 bolts is a really good deal. From there, we want to supplement it with any of these other profiles. Chain of Command for 26 points is more expensive than the Magistrate, but it's getting us a whole bolt with some useful and interesting other pieces of equipment. Drop bears are particularly nice. But really the way to think about it is it's 5 points more than a Magistrate, and it gives +1 special die to the multi-sniper. This is a very good source of Chain of Command. It opens up things like Joan and Max and the Tikbalang, and you should consider taking it in many lists. The other interesting options are a Paramedic is absolutely fine, but the KHD and Hacker, especially the KHD, can be very interesting. Warhorse BTS 6 hackers, even at willpower 12. Warhorse and BTS 6 on a hacker is just a good combination of skills, and the fact that it's got an EM mine, that's just nice to have, at a +1 burst boarding shotgun. Now, marksmanship on a boarding shotgun is not an incredible combination. It is nice, but often boarding shotguns want to be assaulting in close range at positions where your opponent is denied cover, but 3 dice +1 special die on 19s under almost any circumstance is still just very nice to have. Being single wound means I don't always want to do a close assault with this piece, but it is an option that you can have. Bolt duos just generally a very nice thing to access in this faction, and probably the best source of MSV ARO that we have. On that note, I will just mention Kahu Special Group. Kahu can't be part of a Haris team, but can absolutely form a duo. But are a regiment I think I see less often in generic PanOceania, even if they are still really very serviceable. And the reason for that becomes kind of apparent if we step back and just think about some of the profiles we've been discussing till now. PanOceania is chock full of incredibly good quality, transformative, powerful lieutenants. And that means that the NCO skill is just not incredibly worth paying for in PanOceania. It's not bad, but it bloats the cost of all of these Kahu out, and without NCO, they're fine. They're fine. But they are single wound, armor 2, BTS 3, yep, so are bolts. But the big difference between a bolt fire team and a Kahu fire team is in the piece that we choose for our gun. The Kahu Feuerback is 34 points. Now, it's a very good gun. It barely needs duo bonuses. It's quite nice to have. 22 points, or 24 for the Kahu Paramedic, 25 for the Kahu Engineer is affordable enough, worth paying for. These are still reasonably costed. But the Kahu Feuerback is 8 points more than the Bolt Multi-Sniper. Now, it is better. It's got plus burst, it's firing armor-piercing double action rounds, and there are definitely circumstances where mimetism is not necessarily better, but there are circumstances where mimetism is very good to have, whereas marksmanship, while a very, very good skill, doesn't always necessarily have value. If you're shooting models that have limited or no cover, if you're shooting models like flyers, for example, Marksmanship does not have value, whereas mimetism does. But that cost differential on the Feuerback, coupled with the fact that part of what you're paying for with Kahu is the NCO, has kind of collectively meant that bolts push them out a little bit, even if Kahu are still totally fine to take. The bolt utility, like the secondary bolt profiles, being better and more interesting, well, more useful than Kahu secondary profiles also contributes, and so while I think Kahu are good, I would usually lean towards Bolt first. However, if you play on tables where climbing plus is very, very valuable, you would consider looking back toward Kahu again because they do have that skill and it is very good. Now, bolts, and to a lesser extent Kahu, are themselves kind of a segue unit between models that kill in active and models that kill in ARO. And that segue continues but does not end with the Swiss Guard, and in particular the Swiss Guard missile launcher. And there are some points that I want to make about the Swiss Guard and how it needs to be used. We are mostly interested in one profile, the light shotgun missile launcher +1 special die. Now, there are other interesting profiles that you can experiment with. The martial arts CC21, the Killer Hacker, certainly the HMG, these are all solid, cool, and interesting profiles. In any other situation, a 56 point ballistic skill 15, mimetism 6, 5, armor 5, BTS 6 trooper would be very, very good. But this missile launcher is just transformative when it goes into a list. It fundamentally changes what a list can do and how it can play in really significant ways, because the Swiss Guard missile launcher is, period, the most dangerous ARO piece in the entire game. It reveals from hidden deployment. It will often fire 2 dice on 18s, worst case 2 dice on 15s in ARO with a missile launcher, while imposing mimetism -6 on the fire back, which means that very, very often when it reveals, it gets 1 or more kills because that template can hit multiple models if you have advanced poorly. There have been many, many people who have played against the Swiss Guard, not really understood the risk they were facing, checked it with their face, triggered that ARO template, taken terrible damage, and then, and here is the actual mistake, continued to try to fight it. And this is where we get into, firstly, the counterplay against the Swiss Guard, and then secondly, as the PanOceanian player, the response to that counterplay. Here is how you counterplay against the Swiss Guard. The first thing you do is you have to identify that it exists at deployment. That should usually be pretty possible because it is a 60-point, 1.5 SWC hole in deployment. You can often tell that something like this is coming, just count the SWC and try and eyeball approximately your opponent's points. And certainly if they are at 14 troopers on the field and it's a 4.5 or 4 SWC list, you can probably assume that this guy is waiting in the wings. Okay, cool, there's a Swiss Guard somewhere, it's going to be the missile, or at least you should assume that it will be, at which point think about some locations where it can deploy. Don't necessarily be afraid the entire game of advancing through those positions. Sooner or later, the Swiss Guard is going to reveal. You want to play in a way that kind of forces it to. If you build lists, at least lists the way that I like to in other factions, you'll have expendable attack elements. Attack with them. The Swiss Guard will drop out, it will probably want to reveal, we'll get to why in a moment, it will get its kill or it won't if you're lucky, and for the rest of the game you just fucking ignore it. Throw smoke, throw disco, use visibility control, advance along other angles, and don't fight the goddamn thing. Because it is, unless you have a perfectly purpose-built gun, and I'm talking like Aleph, Marut, Myrmidian throwing smoke inside 24 inches, it's just annoyingly difficult to fight this thing. It's mimetism too high, it's armor too good, it's ballistic skill too good, it's bitch too bad, it'll kill you. And you counter that by just not engaging it. Maybe you spang a few shots off of it to try and make it guts prone, it's only willpower 13, but frankly I don't even try to do that, because the cost of a few smoke grenades effectively means that 60 points of my opponent's list is inert. That is a huge portion of an army. Even in PanOceania, where there are cheap models to subsidize the existence of the Swiss Guard, 60 points only fighting one gunfight the entire game, which it kills a Hackerslam biker that you threw forward and you ignore it for the rest of the game, that is not worthwhile. If this thing kills a 10, 11, even a 20-point piece and then doesn't do anything else, it has not justified itself. And so you counterplay against the Swiss Guard by forcing it not to justify itself. PanOceanian players, the counter to that counterplay is to take gunfights in active. The Swiss Guard should be considered an active and reactive piece. Overwhelmingly, the games that I have had against the Swiss Guard fall into one of two camps. The camp where it doesn't do anything in active turn, it reveals in active, it gets a kill, and I ignore it. Those games are easy. The games that threaten to toilet bowl and are very difficult are the ones where it sometimes reveals itself in active turn and gets surprise attack and kills something. Or, failing that, continues to attack during the PanOceania active turn. Yes, it's only 2 dice. Yes, it can only hit once. It doesn't matter. It's a ballistic skill 15, mimetism 6, armor 5, BTS 6 model firing a missile launcher. One hit from a missile launcher will fucking kill you. And so if you are a Pano player, deploy the Swiss Guard in a position where it can take fights in active turn. Even playing like Ariadne, for example, I have had games where the Swiss Guard has dropped out in active turn and killed my Vistrals because it's very, very good at that, and the game has all of a sudden been very hard. The Swiss Guard should be considered, yes, it is the best ARO piece in the game, but it is also a very, very dangerous active turn piece, and it should be used accordingly. One of the best units in the entire faction, the faction's one of the best factions in the entire game. This guy does not necessarily have to be in every single list. 60 points is too expensive, but he should be in your repertoire. Very powerful, very cool, faction-defining unit. Now, right down on the far other end of the ARO spectrum, and very much a pure ARO piece in almost every circumstance, we have the Helot Militia. Working particularly well with Joan, but by no means confined to Joan lists, the Helot is one of the best purpose-built ARO pieces in the game. If you are running Joan, you'll often want to consider the FTO options because they can link with Joan, and there's some nice synergy there. But you can also otherwise absolutely run them unlinked, and if you're running them unlinked, obviously camouflage is the option. Now, kind of ignore surprise attack -3 there. It's not particularly important, it's not what we're taking them for. Camouflage is a defensive tool that combines very well with being a good ARO piece. In all cases, the profile you'll take most often is the submachine gun light rocket launcher, upgrading occasionally to the shock marksman rifle. If you've got points to burn and SWC, you can also run the Red Furies, but basically never run the multi-sniper. The Red Fury is the luxury pick and very fun, the submachine gun light rocket launcher is the budget, and the shock marksman rifle is the in-between. Neurokinetics just means that these guys win face-to-face rolls in ARO, and means that nothing gets to really ignore them. The light rocket launcher in particular, since it has continuous damage, if your opponent breaks cover against a Helot, then they are risking a serious issue, because the Helot in good range, out of cover, is firing 2 dice on 14s with that light rocket launcher, and it's continuous damage. A rocket launcher can theoretically kill any model in the entire game. There are plenty of people out there who have thought that they were taking a reasonable risk walking through a light rocket launch ARO and then got something like, to choose completely at random, an O12 Zeta tag burned to the waterline in an effort to either disrespect or bait out the Helot. No, I will never get tired of that story to the one person who knows who I'm referring to. And it's that threat that makes camouflage helots particularly annoying, because you can't risk them shooting you, but under camouflage you have to invest all of these extra orders to reveal and discover the thing. Camouflage is an ablative layer that has to be stripped away, and there is a failure state where you just fail to discover something. That's why, even with no mimetism, camouflage ARO pieces can be really, really good. The Swiss Guard going back into camouflage isn't always an enormous deal because the Swiss Guard wants to take fights. It will reveal itself to fight you unless you have a true Apex gunfighter that might suppress it. But to the Helot, who will die if a good gun rolls up on them, that camouflage represents one extra order that your opponent has to spend, which is very valuable. So in Joan, you take Helots almost all the time, but you will often take them linked, because with Joan they are regular rather than irregular. With anyone else, you can consider Patsy Garnett leading a team that includes maybe one Helot, maybe one something else. But otherwise, 1 or 2 Helots under camouflage is an excellent defensive piece, even if you have other very good quality defensive pieces in a list. Now, since I've already mentioned Sierra Dronbots, the last kind of thing just to mention in this category of ARO pieces is the Peacemaker Armbot. These are models I've always had a soft spot for, but which have, these days, they're probably a little bit more appropriately costed. They used to be real snap picks in most lists. They were just so useful. They faded out for a little bit, and I think they have come back with the emergence of Racer X, and that's because he synergizes very, very nicely with them. First, just the package by itself. You have a forward deploying profile with Mimetism, Ballistic Skill 12, and a heavy shotgun and pulsar, sometimes +1 burst, but usually we'll be taking the cheaper of the two profiles. With an Oxbot, Oxbots are excellent. They are eminently disposable models with heavy flamethrowers, and the Oxbot 3B has Mine Layer and a Shock Mine. This is probably the best mine layer in the faction. There are others actually that cost kind of comparable points, but they tend to be single role skirmishes that otherwise aren't doing fantastically useful things, whereas the Peacemaker Armbot has a whole bunch of utility. It can launch close assaults. It's very dangerous for this thing to roll up on you. It's got the pulsar, the heavy shotgun, and the Oxbot, which means often it's firing out two bites with a heavy shotgun and the heavy flamethrower, and the Oxbot itself being eminently disposable and the Peacemaker having mimetism, just that's a good close assault piece. It is single wound, you don't want to just walk it through a chain rifle or a series of mines, but the Oxbots can deal with mines very ably just by detonating them for you. But we spoke about how PanOceania has some limitations in the close assault piece, and the Peacemaker Armbot can absolutely punish a null deployment, particularly if it's a null deployment that does not otherwise have like an ambitious or powerful hacking presence out in the midfield that the Peacemaker might not want to walk through. If it's an Ariadna or a Toha null deployment, just roll this guy up. The worst that can happen is that a bunch of EM mines blow up on the Oxbot, and at that point you have information. Now, defensively, they're very useful as an ablative piece. You want to keep the Peacemaker itself mostly safe and have it kind of look for a position where the Peacemaker Silhouette 4 is a genuine vulnerability, it's difficult to deploy. Look for a position where it's safe, extend the Oxbot more aggressively. It's the Oxbot, after all, that is the mine layer. These are good defensive pieces because the Oxbot is eminently disposable and Mine Layer is a nice defensive skill. Even the Peacemaker itself has good ARO options at close range with a template and a heavy shotgun. However, the Peacemaker is also a repeater. That isn't always something that used to be super useful, but Racer X exists now, which means that the ARO zone of control hacking out of the Peacemaker is very, very live indeed. There is even an argument for two of these guys in some lists now, but this was true before, and I think it is still true today. Silhouette 4 with forward deployment +8 is just a little bit difficult to reliably deploy two of on every table. One of, yes, usually quite easy to deploy a Peacemaker. The second one can be a little bit of a challenge. But I love these guys, and I think their time has come again with Racer X. And if you have no other model to give his ballistic skill bonus to, making these into ballistic skill 13, Phys 13, BTS 6, that's really good. And since we're taking him already, if we aren't putting that bonus anywhere else, put it on the Peacemaker. Now, we've talked about Apex gunfighters in active, Apex gunfighters in reactive. We need to talk about the models that force all of those things to become live. And there are a few things we'll mention here, but it starts with the Red Eye. Now, for a full appraisal of the Red Eye, go and take a look at my Infinity Flyers tier list. Yes, it's another tier list, but it's mostly an excuse to talk about all of the flyers. I cover that in depth there. The Red Eye is very good. As flyers go, it is merely very good. All of the flyers are very good, and it is one of the very good flyers of all very good flyers. It has a few qualities that are particularly nice. It is Ballistic Skill 14, which is high. It is Armor 6 and BTS 6. It is not the most durable flyer. There are a couple that I would rate a little bit higher than that due to having additional wounds, other mechanisms, etc. But the Red Eye has the highest armor and BTS collectively of all flyers, and that means a lot. It's also one of the ones that is among the easiest to recover with a gizmo kit, which is very useful, and it has a sensor, which is just very nice to have, especially on a model that is as mobile as the Red Eye. Now, all of those things collectively just make the Red Eye a good flyer. Spitfire and chain rifle, and then your choice of Blitzen and grenade launcher. I prefer the grenade launcher, but I will downgrade to the Blitzen if I need to. Those are all just nice. What makes the Red Eye important to PanOceania is how it interfaces with the entire rest of the faction, because what we want in PanOceania is to force our opponent to have to post pieces for the defense, and the Red Eye is perfect for that. Because the red eye is a flyer, it moves forward incredibly aggressively. It can take positions in the midfield, especially in high ground on the midfield, or even close to your opponent's deployment zone. It can circumvent defenses if they aren't deployed immaculately, and it can put plunging fire down onto your opponent wheresoever they may be on the table. And that forces a defensive response. To defend effectively against flyers, you need to position just so with just the right pieces. You can defend effectively against flyers. Most factions will have some combination of things that give them a line that pins the red eye back. But even that has value because that means they are investing resources into defenses that you can then bring all of your other guns to bear on. You want your opponent to have to be posting ARO link teams, total reaction bot, anything they might pull together to pin back the red eye that you can then spool up your tick belang, for example, and engage. The red eye existing gets value out of your Apex gunfighters, and that is a huge deal. And if your opponent chooses to not deploy anyway, well, you go and kill them with the red eye. Now, this is not a perfectly closed loop. There are things that can defend with obfuscation and care, and maybe camouflage marker ARO pieces that your opponent will choose to reveal on their own terms, hidden deployment elements, ambush pieces, a good quality midfield minefield. There are lots of different tools, even just a very well dug in hacking network that is resistant to plunging fire from outside zone of control. There are ways to defend against the red eye and other stuff, but the red eye's effect on the rest of the PanOceanian force mix cannot be understated, because for all of the factions that don't have those quite special tools for defending against the whole force mix all at the same time, they just force an absolutely brutal Sophie's choice that can lead to PanOceanian victory in a lot of cases. Now, there's a few other models that also broadly fit into this can punish null deployment, can incentivize ARO. On the very cheap end of the scale, we have motorized bounty hunters. These are very useful in PanOceania, albeit much, much cheaper. They are a very fast model with Impetuous that can move forward and do damage, usually trading up if it's not stopped. And so, while they are a very lightweight element, incentivizing your opponent to ARO, or even just yeeting one forward to cause them to reveal hidden deployment or camouflage ARO pieces, gives the bounty hunter some value that enable your big guns to get value themselves. As a rule, if you can, always take the SMG Chain Colt. It is tempting occasionally to downgrade to the boarding shotgun, but a Riot Stopper is a non-lethal weapon. You want the Chain Colt to be able to actually do damage if you are trading. You might roll up a cool gun with booty reroll, it happens quite a lot, but the combination of the chain colts and a suppressive fire capable tool make this usually the best profile. To note, you don't always have to attack with this. The other role that the motorized bounty hunter fulfills that can be very, very useful is just mobile repeater killer. Many of the things that we've talked about over the course of this video so far are hackable, and having something that can very quickly and adroitly respond to enemy deployed repeaters, either deployable repeaters or pitches, is extremely useful. And so 9 points for a couple of orders to go and take down enemy repeaters without having, for example, to expose your pathfinders and their deactivators to hacking AROs, very useful. Now, to briefly mention a few other pieces here, Orc Troops, I particularly mentioned the boarding shotgun +1 burst. 4 dice on 20s is a very good face-to-face roll, and the Orc can be used to kind of punish people who null deploy. Difficult, but 26 points is not bad. It's just a matter of figuring out how you get link bonuses, because the HMG and Feuerbach do start to get a little bit pricey. This can be a worthwhile profile to investigate, though. If you wanted to try it out, I would start by putting it in a bolt fire team. Another interesting option to consider are blade ops. Now, I don't really think of these as close assault myself, even though theoretically a boarding shotgun or an AP submachine gun with +1 damage, ballistic skill 13, and mimetism is at least theoretically dangerous in close assault. These are single wound troopers. The reason why they're interesting is that they are linkable and they have tactical awareness, and the engineer is a linkable tactical awareness engineer, which means that it can be duoed with something like a Bulletier Armbot, who again can benefit from Pilot X's REM driver to be more dangerous, and frankly, either the Spitfire or the heavy shotgun could be a good expendable-ish element to move forward. Yes, it's only single wound, but it will be propelled forward by Tactical Awareness Engineer, and then repaired by that engineer if it goes down or is disabled. I would say this is a bit more of a niche pick, but I think it's interesting and was worth considering. Finally, we have the option of punishing null deployment the more Varuna-esque way by just making it very annoying for your opponent by just raining spec fire down on them that forces them to come to us. This doesn't make our active turn guns live quite so much as our reactive turn guns, but if you're running a Swiss Guard and Helots and want to force the enemy into them, consider a Squalos Mark II with Grenade Launcher. Its tactical awareness, the Grenade Launcher is damage 5, it's PS6 with Ballistic Skill Attack SR-1, that is quite dangerous, and you can just rain shells down with this thing until your opponent goes, fine, I'm going to come out and try and kill that, and then you kill them with your Swiss Guard. The Squalos is a very serviceable tag otherwise, but it is generic. It has tactical awareness, it's a nice silhouette 6-piece, it's ballistic skill 15. It is just doing good tag things at a very reasonable price point, but I think the Grenade Launcher is the unique value option. I wouldn't really, for example, be looking for the Squalos Mark II NCO in this faction because, as noted, the NCO is not a high-value skill in PanOceania, and the Tick Belang exists if we want a piece like this. Now, from here, having spent all of this time on things that kill our enemy and things that force our enemy to position themselves in a way where we can kill our enemy, let's actually spend some time talking about specialists that can kill our enemy. And we're going to start with Banshees. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit thinner on the ground, and I would hope so because we're an hour and 4 minutes into this video. But the Banshee is PanOceania's sole combat jump regiment and one of only a few parachutists, and fortunately it's very good. A nice stat spread, ballistic skill 12, armor 2, BTS 3, and willpower 13. It has an MSV 1 and the usual skills, including super jump, jet propulsion. Now, there are a few profiles that we can consider here. Frankly, all of them have different levels of viability. I would not generally run the regular hacking device. We have Pilot X for that. But all of the others, the Light Shotgun Pulsar, the Submachine Gun Pulsar, Wild Parrot, these are worthwhile as fight pieces. But what we're really looking for once we've covered all our other bases is a model that can kill things and be a specialist. And the Killer Hacker is perfect for that. It's got an MSV1 BS-12 submachine gun. It forks that with a Burst 2 Pulsar, which is just very annoying on a model that will parachute in, make one super jump, and then just lay 2 templates down over something. And the Killer Hacker makes it a specialist. It's a fast specialist. It's willpower 13 BTS 3, so it can make kill runs on enemy hackers. It's not going to win any prizes in the hacking war, but if you're just going after something that is moderately vulnerable, some generic hacker in the backfield, fill your boots, you can use this to do it. And frankly, if they're a hacker in most other respects, you can always kill them with the Pulsar or the submachine gun. Just a good hybrid regiment that arrives responsively, moves quickly, and then can both accomplish objectives and kill things. A very, very good piece. Similar in cost, but on the heavy end of town, we have Teutonic Knights of the Sacred Military Order of the Teutons. I like these guys, but I do respect their limitations. They are good, not fantastic, but good in close combat. CC22, Martial Arts Level 2. They dodge very, very nicely on 17s, covering good ground when they do. They're fast and they're impetuous. They have limited cover, not no cover, so they can be surprisingly difficult to shift when they're entrenched. They are AVA2, you will usually only see one of them, they can't think in this faction, and they have basically one particularly interesting profile, and that is the Specialist Operative. He has a submachine gun and a Panzerfaust. Lord knows that Panzerfaust can do some work, he is ballistic skill 13, but combining impetuous movements with decent speed, good dodging, just good enough close combat and just good enough close assault, a BS-13 submachine gun wins no prizes, but it buys time to close into CC, on a model that is a 2-wound specialist is just useful. It fills certain gaps that exist in the faction. It's a specialist that potentially gets itself forward, presses some buttons, and then is a heavy infantry fight man in the midfield. I think most PanOceanian players are aware of how useful this can be, but for a model that is only 2 points more expensive than a Tactical Awareness Pathfinder and has a lot of the same benefits at a lot of the same speed, but is a full heavy infantry, this guy is just useful and interesting and worth exploring. I don't usually play any of the other profiles. I might consider the Light Shotgun Panzerfaust if I'm playing a scenario that just wants some close assault, but the Specialist fulfills multiple roles and is very useful as a result. In a similar vein, and way at the top end of town, we have the Team Crux Father Knight. The FTO 46-point profile is the go-to here, and it's a do-everything piece. It's one of the few sources of albedo in the faction. It is a good enough gunfighter. 4 dice on 14s is not winning any prizes, but it's not losing any either. And it's one of the very few models in the faction that is that genuine multi-role piece. Now, a Hadamoto Imperial Guard, this guy absolutely is not, but he has a grab bag of skills, and sometimes a piece like this is going to be your jam. I kind of think that every Pan-Oceanian player should experiment with this guy at least once, because if you like him, you will really like him. But at 46 points, he's beginning to impinge on the kind of points that we use to pay for really transformative and elite powerful gunfighters. And so he's a piece that you really want to test and see if you like, rather than just windmill slamming into every single list. If you like him, I think you will really like him, but he doesn't always fit as cleanly. He represents a compromise to some of that standard Pan-Oceanian game plan that I laid out. Now, there are a bunch of skirmisher specialists to complement drop troops and other pieces in Pan-Oceania. I do not have time to mention them all, so I'm going to call out my favorite, the Zulu Cobra. Now, Pan-Oceania does not have access to the Varuna unique mine layer multi-marksman profile that Zulu Cobras have in Varuna, but we do have access to probably the second best profile, which is the Killer Hacker with a Pitcher. This model is a Willpower 13 specialist with, if not infiltration or good forward deployment, then at least forward deployment +4, and it is camouflage that can be re-entered. So you can use that as a gap closing tool or to cover ground, and then re-camouflage if you need to, and the rest of the package is just genuinely useful. It's a solid KHD. I've lost plenty of hacking fights to this guy. It has its own pitcher at ballistic skill 13, and the important thing about it otherwise is that its guns fight totally fine. BS-13 surprise attack mimetism with a breaker combi and an assault pistol, that can do work. You should be getting kills with ballistic skill attacks with the Zulu Cobra, in addition to them doing hacking and specialist duties. These are still Pan-Oceanian troops. They can still fight, and the gunfighting is genuinely good. Technically, they aren't an unhackable troop, because if you're taking the KHD, then by definition it's the hackable model, although you can absolutely consider the forward observer if you just don't want to play that game. It has the same guns. Of all of the Pan-Oceanian camouflage slash skirmisher specialist type troops, and there are a surprising number in the faction, the Zulu Cobra is my go-to and my favorite. Now, there's just a few more profiles that I really want to talk through, and the first of them is the Black Air. Not the multi-sniper. Multi-sniper neurokinetics is a very, very good combination, but it's a very good combination in Kestrel where it can be linked. In vanilla, we want to be looking at this guy. I think people forget sometimes that Pan-Oceania has a parachutist deployment zone. But Pan-Oceania has a parachutist deployment zone, and it has mimetism and MSV2, and is a killer hacker. Now, the submachine gun is modest. It's not a fantastic piece to be gunfighting with, but if you're turning up off your opponent's back table edge, fighting them out of cover while you have all of these mods, this should be able to get some kills. It's also got decharges, it's an elite troop, it's a medium infantry, so it does a ton of specialist classified missions. And frankly, much of the time, it's just a profile that people are going to forget exists. Do not sleep on it, because in Pan-Oceania, we're often going to be visibly presenting 14 troop, because there'll be a Swiss Guard or a Banshee or something, and we want to keep people afraid of this just so that it impacts how they deploy and the mental load that they're bearing. Not a troop for every list, but a troop to remember existing. Finally, I want to mention drummers. They're very hard to fit in lists, bluntly, not easy to include. They're very expensive, but I just think they're neat. They're one of my favorite conceptual unit profiles, and there are some things that are cool and interesting here. In particular, to call out the cheapest profile, 21 points, forward observer, marksman rifle with, let's move this up here, a drumbot that itself has a forward observer. Now, is this kind of just a much more expensive version for most of the same effect that you get from Auxilla and Oxbots in Neoterra? Yes, but we aren't playing Neoterra. Neoterra does not have access to, for example, Joan of Arc. And since this is what we've got, this is what we might choose to take. Again, these are only sometimes in lists, but I very much like having the ability to roll, even if it's willpower 12 and 11 respectively, 2 dice on an objective. There are some scenarios where that is just high value, and peripherals are good. We can also give some consideration to basically any of the gun profiles. The HRMC is obviously very useful. Now, there's no real utility here to combine them with Racer X because they already have Ballistic Skill 13. But a HRMC is a HRMC, even if the phrase disposable HRMC kind of causes some cognitive dissonance. You do want to try and keep these guys alive, which means that you are often dedicating a speedball to the Drumbot HRMC. They don't have remote presence, so they aren't easy to repair with an engineer. And with only that one wound, that can present some challenge. Now, the ultimate vanity pick, and which one day I want to play a game with, are any of the profiles that have multiple Drumbots. This gives you all of the benefits of the I have two specialists activating with the same order, but we also get either a multi-HMG Drumbot or the Neurokinetics Feedback +1 Burst Drumbot, and like, fuck it, go for it, we ball. Can you fit these things in a list? That's just cool. That's 3 dudes, one dude with 2 remotes, one of the remotes is a forward observer, and one of the remotes has an enormous ARO or active turn gun. That's cool. I want to play with that. It's way too expensive. This thing costs like more than a head curry. And the big gun is single wound, but they're just incredibly neat ideas, and they can be made to work. You can fit one vanity profile, even in a PanOceanian list that's really trying to flex on the most powerful stuff, and these are my pick for most fun and interesting profile. I even want to play with this new profile, the Ballistic Skill Attack -3 Multi-Sniper, because it's being paired with a forward observer remote. I don't know if we're going to be putting guided missile launchers in a PanOceanian army. Does seem a bit redundant, but hey, 2 forward observers and they're synchronized. What a time to be alive. You are not going to see these in the list that I will show off at the end of this video, which are rapidly approaching, because I am a coward and didn't include them. I played something more generic instead. But of all of the many things that in PanOceania you might try to include as luxury pieces and try to crack the code on and make work for you, the piece for me that is most resonant are the drummers and their drum bots. I love these little guys. And that brings us to our showcase list to wrap this video up, which I had a bunch of choices here, but I went with a Joan of Arc list. This is probably going to look pretty standard to many people, but it's one that I've seen played, or it's a variation of one that I've seen played many times. I can speak to it and I know that it's good and fun. I've rejigged some elements from the versions that I'm familiar playing against because I've been playing a bunch of Hack Islam recently and I am more and more aware of how good Inspiring Leadership's coordinated order is, and I want to take advantage of that, but otherwise, many things in here will be pretty familiar. We are starting with, well, Joan of Arc, but we're starting with a Swiss Guard and a Red Eye. This is a list where the Swiss Guard does need to do active turn work, but part of the benefit of how that's going to play in this list is we are very explicitly going to be, well, potentially revealing him in active turn, and then using Joan of Arc's coordinated forward order to move him forward if we need to. We want this Swiss Guard to be playing almost like a kind of slow tag, where it moves into a firing position, gets kills, and then moves back, and Joan is going to help facilitate that. Once the Swiss Guard has suppressed any ARO pieces, if there are ARO pieces that need suppressing, then the Red Eye will move out, and it will also be able to benefit from coordinated orders to move forward as part of this combat group. We can't use super jump if we do that, but 8 inches is still a very long way to move, so don't be afraid to just have it move normally as part of a Joan coordinated order. Joan herself is linked with 2 helots. Doesn't that make it kind of difficult for her to coordinate? Not really, but it does require some care. Much of the time, she'll do something like maybe move them forward with tactical awareness. Maybe she won't even do that. Just bear in mind that before, if you want to save the command tokens, before Joan uses Inspiring Leadership, you need to make sure that the helots, one of the 2, is the fire team leader. That means that the helot will stay the leader of the fire team when she leaves it by spending her lieutenant order, which lets her rejoin it at the end of the turn. Frankly, it isn't essential that she rejoins it. The helots are only really necessary to give her +1 special dice, like if you want that. They are perfectly fine just giving themselves +1 special dice and being best boys in ARO. Joan does like moving them around with the fire team and the tactical awareness and getting a +1 SD herself since she has no visual mods, but it's not essential. We then have Pilot X for all of the reasons previously described with just one Racerbot. The Racerbot is a bit of a points concession. It would be nice to have another one, but we want to fit a lot into this list. You can trim some points a little bit in Combat Group 2 if you need to. I didn't feel the need to. One Racerbot felt fine. This is another piece that will be very valuable coordinating with Joan. 8 inches forward to move. gets it a very long way up the table, at which point it can kind of trivially either shoot out the mine dispensers or place a deployable repeater or two if you think you need that. Pilot X does all of the things that Pilot X does that are good. Motorized Bounty Hunter, another piece that coordinates forward well, and there are a lot of hackable things in this list. We want elements that can go in after it. We might just launch a close assault with this guy, but we're more likely to reserve her in order to be able to hunt down enemy repeaters if that's a thing we think we need. Fugazi Johnbot and a Warcore is 10 points for 2 regular orders because this is a Joan of Arc list. In Combat Group 2, we have things that either we don't think we're going to use as part of coordinated orders, or it isn't practical to, or which play a good support role. The Peacemaker is a piece that I like using and plays very nicely with Pilot X. The repeater is the biggest thing, but it is a beneficiary of the ballistic skill 13. The Zulu Cobra is in the same combat group as the Peacemaker because it might be able to pretend to be a mine, and it's a piece that I wanted. Now, this is something that you can cut if you or trim if you want to save points. This could very easily be a piece like a Banshee, for example, which is cheaper than a Zulu Cobra KHD and frees up some points to do other things elsewhere, but I really like the Zulu Cobra. I like it being able to spend, like, this combat group, if it doesn't need to attack, can spend orders spec firing with the Sasha, it can spend orders firing pitches and recamouflaging with the Zulu Cobra, or it can spend orders laying mines with the Armbot. There's a lot of utility here that can be spent on close assault with both the Zulu Cobra and the Peacemaker, but does not have to be. This functions nicely as a defensive support group. If you go first, we've got counterintelligence, it's quite good to go first. You can just use this group to secure space with mines and pitches and a little bit of spec fire. We have a Fennec Forward Observer because I don't really think you should leave home without them. Group 2 is the ideal place for it because it will support all of Combat Group 1 with disco balls without needing to draw on Combat Group 1 orders. To note, if we were going to save some points, for example, with the Zulu Cobra, getting baggage into the list could be worthwhile. I am acutely aware that this is basically a one-shot disco because you really want, if you're going to want to succeed, you'll often fire both shots. You can always attempt a reload with a speedball, but that's a little bit risky, so just kind of bear that in mind. Finally, a Magistrate Chain of Command. He's a specialist, but we'll probably just be bunging him in the rear with the gear because most of what he is chain of command for Joan at the cheapest possible price point and counterintelligence. Bunch of utility there for 21 points. There are a lot of irregulars in this list, but a lot of them can also spend their orders productively if they need to. The Motorized Bounty Hunter, the Sasha, etc. If Joan is dead, I'm going to assume that the helots she's dragged with her are probably dead as well, so that really just leaves us the Warcore. We can endure the loss of Joan. We don't want to. We also don't want to get her isolated, but we can endure this, and Chain of Command helps. This is just overall a really solid list. Where it does have limitations is it's not a Tikbalang list, for example. It's not a Hetkari or a Cutter list. You could have better gunfighting. We are trading very heavily on the Swiss Guard, but I'm kind of expecting us to be able to. The Swiss Guard does a lot of work in active turn, and this list is meant to force that concept and get just a bunch of other value. I have played with a list like this, I have played against it, I can vouch for it, and one of the nicest things about it is that it is even close to the only PanOceanian archetype, because there's tons more you can do with this faction. And that kind of wraps up this video. We've run long already, but there is a lot to talk about in PanOceania, and so I hope that you've enjoyed this. Is there anything that I missed? Almost certainly, absolutely. What was the piece that I didn't talk about that you'd have liked me to? By Pandra, she's one of the best doctors in the game. Should I have mentioned Nisses? I didn't even really cover the basic racer bots in any great detail. What about Griffin Troops or Aquila Guard? Which of these should I have mentioned? Which other skirmishers should I have mentioned? There was lots and there's only so much time. What are some of the PanOceanian lists that you like using and other profiles that I didn't cover? Otherwise, just as a reminder, if you've reached this part of the video, please hit like, please hit subscribe, and if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. This wasn't a channel member request, but we do take requests from channel supporters, because I want to produce what you guys want to see. We cover other games in addition to Infinity, but we cover Infinity about once a week, and so that means, for now, I hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.